Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate the welcome. Enjoyed being on a panel. I was on a panel with Representative Bannister the other evening on something I might have read about, but ethics reform, something that I'm kind of into these days. And it was a pleasure to be with you and appreciate your hard work on the Judiciary Committee and in the House Republican Caucus. First off, it is great to be back here in Greenville. It is great to be here with all of you. I was walking in and I mentioned to somebody as I was walking in the door, I love Greenville and I love the Chamber. And so it is great that I get to be with you today to talk about a couple of things that are really important to me. And I want to talk kind of just a little bit, Bruce mentioned it in his remarks when he was introducing me. I was really excited because last year I was elected by my colleagues. We had 23 Republican attorneys general in the country. I was elected chairman of the Republican AG Association. And during the election year, for the first time in the history of the country, the Republican Attorneys General Association elected 27 Republican AGs nationwide, and that was we added 4. So for the first time in our history, we now have a majority in the country. And it was something, and I wish I could take credit for it. Thank you. I wish I could take credit for it, but it was the quality and the caliber of candidates we had around the country, and so I give them all the credit. I was just at the helm at the time, but it was a really amazing opportunity as chairman of that association. I was able to, first off, it's really neat because it puts you in a position to work with your colleagues on the other side of the aisle with the Democratic Attorney General Association and other attorneys general through the National Association of AGs to talk about all kinds of national issues like data security protection. Protecting your personal information is one of the initiatives. Human trafficking, the initiative in human trafficking from 3 years ago at NAG is one of the things I brought back to South Carolina and became extremely passionate about, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Obviously there are things going on today involving internet safety. There are other issues going on out there that we're picking up around the country with the governors and the AGs that I'm borrowing and stealing from every state I can, the best ideas out there. Real quick, I want to talk to you, spend a couple of minutes talking about some of these national hot button issues on the criminal justice side. Then I'm going to switch to ethics and grand jury reform and just general government restructuring, some thoughts that I have that I would like to get all of your buy-in as we move forward. I mentioned human trafficking. Bruce is right. 4 years ago they passed, or 3 years ago, they passed a human trafficking law in South Carolina that took us from the bottom of the bad list, and unfortunately I know South Carolina's on a lot of bad lists with these type of statistics, but it took us to the top of the good list on the best human trafficking law in the country. The problem is they inadvertently omitted giving the ability of the grand jury the authority to go after human traffickers. We have a human trafficking law and we can investigate human traffickers, but we cannot do it with a grand jury. Why is that important? Because somebody in Greenville County, a Greenville County deputy is investigating a human trafficking ring, spends 6 weeks getting a woman who was arrested as a prostitute to talk about her experience, only to find out she was a victim, not a prostitute. And once she starts talking, she says, yes, I was also sold in Pickens and Oconee and Anderson and Greenwood and Lawrence. He says, well, you got to stop right there. You got to go and talk to each of those agencies because I don't have the jurisdiction to go to those counties. As you all know, just like drug traffickers, human traffickers don't stay in one county or even in one municipality within a county. The grand jury would allow that investigator through the grand jury to go to and conduct one investigation in every jurisdiction across in multiple counties at the same time. It's a very powerful investigative tool. And just yesterday in Columbia, South Carolina, the sheriff of Richland County busted a sex child exploitation ring in which young pre-adolescent and teenage girls were being sold on the internet. There was a business model, father-son team, and the thing is they believe that this is in multiple counties. So we need that human trafficking jurisdiction in the state grand jury. It is absolutely important, and I've challenged the General Assembly to get it done and so we can get the governor to sign it into law by the end of February because we are ready to go after human traffickers right now. It is a $30 billion a year industry. It is the fastest growing criminal industry in the world. It is the second largest, although it'll eventually be the largest, only behind drugs and armed trafficking. And the reason it's going to take it over is because when you're selling a human being, when you sell drugs, I give you money, or you give me money, I give you the drug, I have to do what? Go get more drugs. If I give you a person, you give me the money, I get the person back. So you can see how a thug, someone who would intend to sell a human being, would want to do that type of criminal enterprise because they can reuse that human being. That is what makes it such a lucrative enterprise. And it really puts the most at risk in our society on the table for people to prey on. And so right here in the upstate, there are human trafficking rings. When I got elected Attorney General, I truly thought that this is something that only happens in Liam Neeson movies in Eastern Europe. But it happens not only in the United States, because the United States is the #1 destination for human trafficking right now, but it happens in South Carolina, and it happens in every community. And you don't have to be kidnapped to be trafficked. So teaching people about changing the culture of our state and how we approach human trafficking is something that I am extremely passionate about. I developed that passion from my national affiliation with all the AGs in other states that are dealing with the same problem. So hopefully Representative Bannister, y'all will help us get that through. Another grand jury reform I would really like to see, we don't have a bill yet, but it's coming, but is allowing the grand jury to go after insurance fraud when it involves an amount of $50,000 or more and 2 or more people in the conspiracy. The insurance industry pays, I think, is the 3rd highest payer into the general fund through the premiums that people pay on their insurance premiums, through the taxes and fees. Yet we are in dead last place in the country and the amount of money and resources we put toward detecting, investigating, and recovering insurance fraud. And of course, I spoke to the Director Ray Farmer just last week on the Department of Insurance, who says on average 10% is added to the insurance premium to offset the fraud that's being perpetrated out there. So we have asked for additional resources for SLED. I have the prosecutors. We need the investigators to go after the insurance fraudsters, and we need the grand jury to be able to go after the big insurance scam rings that are going on all over the state. When you look at what it's costing the state and what it costs people who buy insurance, it is devastating to our economy. That's another thing that we're going to be talking about. I also want to talk to you about, there's one other grand jury reform, but before I talk about it, I want to talk to you about my view, having been in government now as an elected official for 4 years. These are some general thoughts that I've been sharing with people, and I intend to advocate strongly over this session and the next session, the session after, over the next several years. And every member of the General Assembly I've spoken to has at least conceded that whether or not they agree with my solution, they agree that there is a problem. So let's go back to 3rd grade. 3rd grade civics class. How many branches of government are there? 3. Come on, guys. All right, Socratic here. All right, we got the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branch. Now, when you actually look at the 3 branches of government, I have come to the realization that we really only have 2 branches of government, the executive and the legislative. And the reason I say that, is in South Carolina, we have what I had believed at one time to be an absolute stellar model for electing judges. And while it is better than what some other states do, it is not as good as it could be. There are only 2 states in the entire country that elect judges the way South Carolina does, us and Virginia. So 48 states have chosen a different model. And some models are worse, some are better. But I want to tell you why it's important that we look at this. Right now, currently, the way a judge is elected in South Carolina is people apply to be a candidate for judge to what is called the Judicial Merit Selection Committee. This is a committee that it is comprised of 10 individuals, 6 of whom are actual members of the General Assembly, 5 appointed by the Speaker of the House, 3 by the President Pro Tem, by the Judiciary Chairman in the Senate, and 2 by the President Pro Tem. So you have legislative leaders picking a majority of the 10 people who do all the vetting of all the judicial candidates. So the General Assembly vets the candidates. They spit out 3 candidates to the General Assembly, then what happens next? The General Assembly votes on one of those 3 people. So the General Assembly or the legislature vets, votes, and elects, and then does what? Approves the budgets of the judiciary. Okay? There is absolutely 0 executive branch involvement in the selection, election, and vetting of judicial candidates to the bench. I believe strongly that while the General Assembly should have total providence over how judges are elected in the end, there needs to be executive branch influence. Because I think what you're going to have situations in which perfect storms are created, when it comes to the executive branch, who is charged with enforcing the law and usually is the one going before the judiciary. That's usually me. But there is absolutely no check that gives us an equal footing with that third branch of government. So I'm going to ask the General Assembly to look hard at giving some type of influence to the executive branch. It doesn't need to be from me, just from my branch of government. Perhaps the governor should be appointing several members to the election committee. Maybe the Constitution needs to be tweaked a little bit. When you look at the types of judges, we've got a lot of great men and women on the bench, but there are only certain types of attorneys that get elected to the bench because they're the only ones that have the ability to take 6 months off to campaign for the position. If we went to a process in which you didn't have to campaign as much because the governor had greater influence in selecting people to be voted on, then you could have a wider variety of types of judicial candidates that could be voted on, possibly and perhaps more business-friendly candidates as opposed to one type of attorney. And I don't need to say that one type of attorney is better than the other. I just think our judiciary is better represented when you had a wider array of judicial candidates with various and differing backgrounds. Another area that I would like to see in our reforms is I started looking at the three branches again. And you look at the executive branch. The governor runs most of the executive branch of government, the cabinet agency. She doesn't obviously run the statewide electeds like myself, but she runs a bulk of it. She's only elected, or he or she is only elected to up to 2 consecutive terms. But when you go to the legislative branch, you look at the Speaker of the House, whoever the Speaker is at any time. The Speaker of the House is elected by, I believe, 63 people. It's the majority of the members of the House of Representatives. 63 people vote for one person. That person then controls an entire half branch of government with no term limits in that position. And you know that once you're in that position of power, you're able to stay there for pretty much as long as you want. On the Senate side, the President pro tem of the Senate gets elected with 23 or more votes, and they run the other half of a branch of government, and they are able to stay there indefinitely for as long as they want. One answers to 23 people, that's their electorate. The other answers to 63 or 64 people, that's their electorate. But they basically collectively run an entire branch of government for as long as they can stay in that position. So very few people are electing people that run an entire branch of government. Go to the judicial branch. One person runs an entire branch of government, from the Supreme Court all the way down to the magistrate courts. Yet that person gets elected by 50 plus 1% of the General Assembly. I believe that's what would be by 83 or 86 people, I think, have to vote. Elects one person. The Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court serves for a decade, for 10 years. And then can run again for another 10 years, and depending on how old they are, can feasibly run a third term. I would like to see, and a lot of this would be rulemaking within the legislative branch or potentially a tweak to the Constitution, where when you are in charge of a branch of government, you can stay in that branch of government as long as the people of your district will elect you, but you do not get to stay indefinitely. You need to rotate out of power, because when power sits in one place for too long, it gets stale. And that goes with everybody, myself included. People should rotate out and let someone rotate in. Whether you're the governor, the pro tem of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, there should be a rotation when you run a branch of government. I believe that will keep fresh blood, that will allow for new ideas, and it keeps people from sitting like pond water and just getting stagnant. And this is not an indictment or a criticism of any individual or individuals currently and in the future or in the past serving in those positions. This is it's a systemic flaw in our system of government that I think that we should really look long and hard at when it comes to reform. That brings me to the next area of reform. And there will be a time and a place for me to go into greater detail to the people of South Carolina on why we need the state grand jury reforms that we need. But one of the reasons I think we need the grand jury reforms is that currently the state grand jury has got statewide jurisdiction. It is the most powerful investigative tool in the state arsenal, and there should be constraints on its power. There should be firewalls between individuals who work in the grand jury and other branches of government. Constraints should be placed on me as the Attorney General because of the power of the grand jury, but the grand jury should be insulated from any potential external influences that could be exerted on it. And it should also, anybody involved in the grand jury process should not be ever put in a position where they feel the pressure to exert influence on the grand jury. In my previous remarks, we know how judges are elected. Currently, if we want to use a grand jury to go investigate powerful members of the General Assembly or powerful elected officials in county government, we have both myself, whoever the Attorney General is, and the Chief of SLED have to go and sign a case initiation. And then once he and I agree, we have to go get permission from a member of the court. Now, there are no indictments, there are no charges at this point. All it is an investigation. It's asking questions, looking if there's probable cause. Sometimes it yields no indictment. No one is ever brought before into the criminal justice system. Yet, a great deal of influence and power can be exerted if someone has the ability on whether or not a grand jury can move forward or even be used. I would like to insulate members of the judiciary from being in that position, as well as the grand jury from members of the judiciary. I think it's important. I think that there should be constraints, due process should attach, but investigating a crime is a purely executive function. If there's an indictment or a charge, then all bets are off and the courts come in and they have total control over the judicial process and the criminal justice system. We go before the courts, we subject ourselves to the courts, but unless and until there's an indictment, there should be limited judicial involvement. A judge can choose to shut a grand jury down. A judge can choose to remove a prosecutor for any arbitrary reason at all. And it becomes very difficult when all you're trying to do is find the truth and represent the people when you're having to fight a bureaucracy and a system that is stacked to have external influence exerted on it. So I've asked the General Assembly to look at some tweaks to the grand jury system that are absolutely and totally not only consistent with, but in compliance with the U.S. Constitution and what are done in other jurisdictions. And that is allow the executive branch to ferret out public corruption or any type of corruption anywhere where the grand jury is allowed under the law to go. So I believe that these are reforms that are necessary, and I can tell you right now, if I'm ever put in the position of investigating a powerful member of the General Assembly ever again, I will not go back to the state grand jury under its current form. Will not do it. I will find another way, like I did before. So having said that, these are some of the things that I think would make our state government infrastructure better. These are things that I think would help us better represent you, the people of South Carolina, who I consider my employer. So, let's see, I've got up till 12:55. Is that the time? How much time do I have? I'll make sure
Question and answers as soon as you're ready.
Okay. Another area that we're focusing on right now, domestic violence. I want to thank Representative Bannister for your leadership on the domestic violence front. We have a serious problem in South Carolina, and there is some there's some comprehensive reforms being brought on domestic violence. I want to applaud the governor and her efforts with her task force. I want to applaud law enforcement around the state and prosecutors. But right now, when a domestic violence case is prosecuted, when someone comes into the criminal justice system because they have beat their spouse or their significant other, there are two tools in the proverbial golf bag that a prosecutor can use: a 30-day misdemeanor or a 1 to 10-year felony. There's a lot of conduct that can happen, just like on a golf course, between the green and the tee. There's a lot of swings between the two. Well, in the courtroom, there's a lot of conduct, and it's not fair to the criminal justice system. It's not fair to the prosecutor. It's certainly not fair to the victim, and it's not fair to the defendant when you have these one-size-fits-all punishments that don't totally reflect the values that are being violated when it comes to domestic violence. Right now, one of the reasons we are one of the worst states and why we have a cycle of domestic violence in this state in particular is because a young boy or a young girl growing up in a home where daddy beats mommy are learning one thing: violence is normal. It normalizes that to them. And when a little girl, or a little boy rather, sees his daddy wailing on his mommy, he's learning that this is normal behavior, and he is much more likely to grow up and do what? Commit that same act against his spouse or his girlfriend. A little girl growing up in a violent home, seeing mommy get wailed on by daddy, is going to grow up thinking it's normal to be in a relationship where someone is beating you down. And she is much more likely to get into a relationship and live in a relationship where she is beaten. I don't want to stereotype it. Domestic violence swings both ways in both genders. It does not discriminate on socioeconomic class, and it can happen to anybody at any time. And just because you grew up in a violent home doesn't mean you're going to be a batterer or mean you're going to be the battered, but it increases the likelihood. So why not increase the penalties when someone beats their spouse in the presence of a minor child in the home? By the way, if you have been convicted of domestic violence in the last 5 years, you should automatically qualify for first-degree domestic violence, which is a felony. And instead of basing the penalties on the number of times, right now it's based on first offense, second offense, third offense. Instead of basing it on the number of times someone comes back, why don't we base the penalty on the type of harm inflicted on the victim? First degree should be a great bodily injury, second, a moderate bodily injury, and third degree, any harm sustained. And if you do something to prevent the person from calling for help, like smashing a cell phone or locking them and preventing them from leaving, then you should automatically be bumped up to the next level to suffer a higher penalty. This would better reflect our values. You see, our values are reflected in our laws, but our laws on domestic violence currently do not reflect our values. And I think that we should be able to give cops and prosecutors more tools so that when they approach those type of domestic cases, they have the ability to have a more appropriate penalty, a more appropriate charge for a perpetrator. And we need to make sure that we get into the middle schools and elementary schools and preemptively and proactively engage young people with age-appropriate material. And it should just be drilled into every child's head that hitting is not okay and being hit is not okay. We've got to get into the schools and educate. It can't just be reacting, because if you're reacting, you're never addressing the problem, you're just dealing with a symptom. So these are some of the things that we need to do to change our culture, to change our views, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's human trafficking, or whether it's internet abuse, which is a serious issue right now. And I've traveled to over 50 schools in the last 3 years, from elementary to high school, with Facebook and Google and other internet companies to talk to children about internet safety. And it is something that every single body in here should be aware of, because we have a lot of predators preying on children on the internet and people being defrauded on the internet. And these are other areas that I'm focusing on. I'm going to close my remarks and open for questions in just a moment, but I do want to talk generically about some national issues. I'm just going to touch them, so I'm not going to dive too deep. The Attorney General is more than just the criminal justice guy. There were some jokes made earlier about accepting checks, and every time I say something to somebody, most of you have heard me say, hey, if you ever need something, call me. What do people always say? I hope I never need you, because they think they're on the other side of the law. There is so much that the Attorney General is involved in that goes beyond the criminal justice system. One is protecting the citizens of the state, protecting our Constitution. I appreciate the shout out I got earlier about defending the Constitution. Every decision I make is based not on so much personal views. They're based on, what does the law require me to do? My client is the state. Where is the Constitution on the matter? And we usually act in 100% compliance with my constitutional mandate. When I'm dealing, one of the roles of the Attorney General is to create a positive work environment for businesses in this state. At the same time, I have to protect consumers from unscrupulous business people who are purely and clearly violating the law. I'm also trying to protect good business practices and practitioners from losing market share from those cutting corners in the free market, violating the law intentionally to get a competitive advantage against others. So it's like balancing a plate on a pencil. You're trying to constantly, you don't want to create a litigious environment. There are attorney generals out there where you can go to their website and as a law firm and you can sign up and basically rent the badge and bring a lawsuit in the name of the Attorney General's office. That is not the role of the Attorney General. And this is not, I'm not going to bash lawyers. I'm a lawyer. We need them. We definitely need them. But we've got to create an environment where consumers feel protected, businesses know that their competitors are abiding by the law just like they are, and that if you violate the law, that the Attorney General is going to apply it in a just, judicious, and fair way and not shake you down for money. That's the role of the Attorney General, is to create a pro-business, free market environment in the state so that people will want to move their businesses here. So that's why I've taken the positions I've had on various lawsuits that we've brought. That's why I've taken my position with the National Labor Relations Board and how it treated a company in the Low Country. You might have heard of it, a small airplane manufacturing firm. That is why I've taken the position I have on the EPA, which I have lovingly dubbed the Eliminate Prosperity Agency. When they try to promulgate rules and regulations that Congress will not pass, Congress people who are elected by you can't have unelected bureaucrats who want to regulate us, but they have absolutely no authority from Congress. And so you see the EPA is trying to promote rules, waters of the U.S., that would turn stormwater ditches or waterways and golf golf courses into waters of the United States, navigable waters. An intermittent water ditch in a farmer's backyard or a ditch on the side of the road could be regulated by the federal government. Can you imagine the construction costs being passed down to people who are constructing when a ditch is now a water of the U.S.? These are the types of things that we're dealing with. They couldn't pass cap and trade in Congress, so now they go to unelected bureaucrats under the authority of the Clean Water Act and try to have carbon dioxide emission standards imposed on states when there has been no legislative involvement from that branch of government at the federal level. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be regulation, but regulation shouldn't come from unelected bureaucrats who rule through administrative fiat. It should come from the people's elected representatives. A business person or a private citizen should have predictability in what the government can and can't do to them. But right now, we have people out there who has never seen a ballot box, or been on a ballot box rather, ruling like this on the whims of political officials in both parties. Both parties. Republicans are just as guilty as Democrats. I'm not going to be partisan on this matter. My job as Attorney General is to hold them accountable and to hold them under the rule of law. The last thing I'm going to say, and it's 12:41, then we're going to go to Q&A. Am I still okay on time? Recently, the President did something under immigration that I just absolutely vehemently disagree with. Now, this isn't an immigration comment on immigration policy. This is a comment on the rule of law. The President just recently tried to do what several Congresses, both during his administration and before his administration, absolutely refused to do. And in the years leading up to this, when he had his party-controlled Congress, he made the following comments. I can't unilaterally go out there and do these things. He would say these to those groups that wanted this unilateral action. He says, I don't have the authority. The Constitution doesn't allow me. I can't go at it alone. When he couldn't get the DREAM Act passed, and when he expanded the DACA policies, the Deferred Access to Childhood Arrivals policy that started to expand, he got to a point to where he had gone as far as he could, and after the election, he came forward and he said, I'm going to exercise prosecutorial discretion, and I'm going to unilaterally across the field come up with an immigration policy with absolutely no weigh-in or buy-in by Congress. And I'm going to do it because they refused to act. Well, that's not a good enough reason to do it. Then he went and he said, I'm going to do it because other presidents have done it. No, ladies and gentlemen, other presidents have not done this. Yes, other presidents have given executive action, taken executive action to allow illegal aliens to stay. And whether you agree or disagree with the executive action, it was done in absolute total concert with an act of Congress. For instance, in 1987, when they passed the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, it was amnesty. It was one-time amnesty for 3 million illegal aliens. It was never going to happen again, and then we were going to strictly enforce immigration laws once we closed the doors. Reagan was asked by members of Congress to file an executive order because some members of families were being split up because of the unintended consequences of the law. So Reagan did an executive order, Bush one did a slightly larger executive order, but both of those orders were in total conformity with a law that Congress had passed. Agree or disagree with it, that's a political question, but it was under the rule of law. This executive action is in direct conflict and direct contravention and opposition to Congress. And when they say that, well, you can exercise prosecutorial discretion, this is my last thought, then I'll take Q&A. I love this. Because as a former prosecutor, back in my former life, prosecutorial discretion is when I look at, say, grand larceny. I look at a case in which someone's been charged with grand larceny, and I say, okay, here are the elements of the crime, the facts as I know it, here are the elements of grand larceny. Can I prove the elements each beyond a reasonable doubt? If I can't, or if I don't think the facts support it, I can exercise prosecutorial discretion and say, I'm not going to charge this individual, I'm not going to enforce the law on this set of facts. That is prosecutorial discretion. What prosecutorial discretion is not, it is not, I got 700 grand larceny cases in my office. I'm overwhelmed. I don't think anybody who falls beneath the mean poverty line should, and who steals over $1,000 in goods, I don't think they should be prosecuted. So I'm just going to unilaterally not prosecute anybody who lives beneath the poverty line for grand larceny across the board, all 700 cases, if those facts meet. That is not prosecutorial discretion. Prosecutorial discretion involves a case-by-case analysis. And not only, for purposes of my analogy, would I not be enforcing the law, but I would be saying, you can also keep your ill-gotten gain. You can keep the items that you've stolen, because I'm not going to enforce the law. And I'm also going to confer some additional benefits on you. That is what is happening here, ladies and gentlemen. It is completely a disregard for the rule of law, and that is why I've joined with Texas and 25 other states in challenging that immigration overreach. And hopefully we'll get an answer from the Southern District of Texas here in the next couple of days on a preliminary injunction. So that was just one hot button issue. I figured I'd address it. If there are questions about other issues, I'll do my best to answer them, and we've got about 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, so we have just a few minutes for some questions, and I'll recognize you if we could. Who's got a first question? Right here in the back.
Can you solve the road problem? Seems very logical.
There is a limit. There is a limit to my authority and power under the Constitution, and I'm out there driving the same roads with you folks. Listen, I'm waiting to see a lot of analysis done on the governor's plan, and I don't know what the best plan is. I haven't studied that issue because I don't directly get involved. We recently were asked to issue an opinion for the governor's plan on whether or not it was a legislative procedural question on whether or not you could do all those things in one bill. And of course, our Solicitor General opined with some limits you can, but it's up to the General Assembly to procedurally act on it. But beyond that, our office has had little role. I do believe that balanced approach that I don't trust the government enough right now to take the taxes the revenue that they raise. I certainly support what the governor said. You've got to reform the Transportation Commission system. It's very regionalized, and they compete against each other. I think we should be looking at it as a whole state. And I certainly like the idea of having a net revenue gain. I just don't know if the math works because I haven't done it on this particular plan, so I don't want to opine on it. But I'm just like you. I'm waiting to see what happens.
Okay, that was a trick question. I have a serious
You really didn't want me to answer that. I should have just shut up. I got it.
On the Affordable Care Act, are we as a state doing anything? Are we fighting anything?
Yes.
Regarding to the Affordable Care?
There's currently two cases that are in direct conflict with one another. One's Halbig, and the other one's the King case. And basically, both cases, the states won, the one we lost. One was in the Fourth Circuit, one was in the D.C. Circuit. But basically, when Congress created the ACA, which we almost beat back, they wanted to incentivize states to create exchanges, state exchanges. They wanted states to create exchanges so that the states would kind of own the problem too. So they said, we will give subsidies to people who buy exchanges set up by the state. Well, 36 states did not set up a state exchange. 14 did. 36 states, therefore, have a federal exchange. And the law was written to say you can only get a subsidy through a state exchange. And Congress did it that way because they wanted us to be on the hook. But now they're saying, well, you got to just ignore that little issue in the law and you should just pay subsidies through everything. I signed on to an amicus with 7 other states that said that is not what the rule of law says. If you meant state exchange and federal exchange, you would have said state and federal exchange. Now, having said that, I do think that Congress and the states are going to be the dog that caught the car if the Supreme Court rules in our favor, which they're going to take they've already taken the case up in this term, and if they rule and they say, okay, 36 states that have federal exchanges, you don't have to pay the subsidies, well, guess what? The ACA is still a law. There's just no funding for it. There's going to be a massive rush to increase Medicaid in all the states. So Congress is going to have to come up with the ACA is a bad policy law. That is my policy statement on it. Now, if it was constitutional, even if it was bad policy, I wouldn't fight it. But we've got to have something to replace it because a lot of people are going to be without subsidies to buy exorbitantly priced health insurance plans. And we've got to have something in its place should the Supreme Court rule in our favor.
Next question, please, Attorney General, right here.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, I serve on your statewide task force for human trafficking.
Thank you.
And I applaud the laws that were passed. We had played a really big role in making sure those laws got passed, and obviously very concerned about the issues with domestic violence as well as a victim service provider. So my question to you on a statewide level, and especially because we're, we just completed writing the statewide plan for trafficking.
Yes.
And I would like to know if there are any plans for resources, getting this plan funded so that we are able to provide better holistic services to victims of human trafficking in the state.
For purposes of my agency, I have asked for additional funding for violent criminal prosecutors to include human traffickers, sex crimes prosecutors, domestic violent offenders. We have asked for additional resources for SLED. And obviously, I believe infrastructure and public safety are two core functions of government that, while I'm extremely conservative on taxpayer dollars going to things, when it comes to those core functions, I believe that we need to invest in probably more resources to shelters. There's one here in Greenwood for human trafficking. It's the only one in the state dedicated to it. I applaud those folks. I believe in public-private partnerships. I believe in incentivizing the private sector to help support these halfway shelters, not just for traffickers, but also for domestic violence and other type of victims of other crimes. But as far as overall funding on a state level, I haven't seen anything out of the task force at this time other than what I'm advocating for my agency. But if you have an idea, then I want to talk to you. And I should probably come to the next human trafficking. I have my people run it, but I probably need to come and talk to you at that meeting and see me afterwards. I'll give you my card. I would love to hear what you have to say. One thing that I like about her and what she said is some of the best ideas don't come from people in Columbia or Washington. They come from you. And if I don't know it, I can't implement it or act on it. So I definitely want to know it, and I appreciate you for standing up and for what you do in our task force.
Good. Next question.
And what are we going to do about the prisons are so overcrowded? I was reading recently where our prisons are more overcrowded than any state in the union. What's your thoughts on that? We're going to get Bruce and them to build some more prisons and do something about that? Did you read recently how this prisoner was treated in prison? He died, he'd been beaten and so forth, and didn't have enough personnel to run the prisons. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, first off, let me say this. Mr. Harrison was one of the first people in Greenville I went to see when I was at like less than 2% in the polls, and we spent a couple of hours together. I asked him to give me a chance. He jumped on board and he never looked back, and he's been with me ever since for the last 5 years. And honestly, I did not deserve to have someone like you support me because I was a nobody, and I want to thank you publicly for what you did and your family. And I really wish you'd ask me an easier question. You're not supposed to do this. It's a great question. Chris, I have not analyzed that specific problem. So I don't have a specific plan. Not to say that I shouldn't have a specific plan, but I'm not in the position to do that. What I will say is this. My former Deputy Attorney General, Brian Sterling, is now the Director of Prisons under Governor Haley. And so I would like to talk with him, but what I think we need to do is we need to look at what types of people are serving prison sentences that are not violent offenders. I think we need to look at that, and we need to make sure that we prioritize who in our society are we shelving. Do they need to be shelved for as long as they have? If they're a violent offender, if they're a threat to the community, if they're a threat to children, I say put them under the prison. But otherwise, there are a lot of people in prison who are serving a prison sentence just because that's what the prison sentence is in the law, and they are going to sit there, and they're not a threat to the community, and there might need to be a better way that we assess those individuals who have been rehabilitated and should not be taking 3 hots in a cot from someone who deserves to be in prison longer. So I think there needs to be an audit of that if there hasn't already been one. I'm not aware, but that's what I would do. Next I would do is I would like to sit down and do a cost-benefit analysis of would it be long-term savings if we were to build more prisons measured against what I just mentioned a moment ago about getting certain people out who don't deserve or should be there, and they're far more violent offenders. If there are halfway to work programs, halfway houses for people with 1 foot in society and 1 foot under the Department of Corrections, we need to look at that. We also got to look at recidivism too. That's a general answer, Mr. Harrison, but maybe we should talk later about a more specific answer. But I know y'all think I have all the answers, but that's a good question, and I appreciate you asking it.
Sir, we're proud of the great job you're doing there.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that. It means a lot. Your friendship
We have
does.
time for one more brief question. Last chance. Here we go. Nope.
I was gonna, and I'm gonna walk slowly out the door, so you can gig me if you want. All right. But I wanted to say first off, Bob Taylor, great to see you. Another person that, and I don't want to go through and start naming everybody that I've gotten to know over the last several years, because there's a lot of people in the audience that I've gotten to know. But you're now the chief cat herder again on council, he was another person I went and saw early on. And so every time I come to Greenville, I make new friends, and it's great to see old friends and people out there like Representative Bannister and seeing your brother the other day. Just so many people up here that I just really consider an extension of my family. I want to thank you for your prayers. I want to thank you for your support. Maybe I wasn't your guy at one time, but I've always tried to live up to one ideal. Always seek to do the right thing, no matter what, even if it costs you your job. Attorney General is not who I am, it's what I do, and I'm prepared to lose this job in seeking to do the right thing. The job that I have is not my job, it is your job. I am merely a trustee of it. You have asked me to be the trustee of this office. So anytime you want to come to the Attorney General's office, it is your office. You come down and see it. I would love to sit down and talk with you about any issues, or come up and visit with you at your business about issues that are important to you. Again, if I'm making bad decisions or doing things you believe are wrong, I don't know it unless you tell me. But I will tell you this, if you tell me, I promise I'll listen to you. Thank you for the opportunity to serve again as Attorney General of South Carolina. Thank you for your prayers, and God bless you all. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.